Hello and welcome to Biblical Breadcrumbs, where in this episode we'll be dealing with Exodus chapters 3 and 4, so you may want to turn there. Exodus chapters 3 and 4, that's where we're going to be this morning or evening or afternoon or whenever it is that you actually watch this. This is the first week where I have a Sunday morning sermon and a Sunday morning class and a Sunday evening sermon, so I'll be posting this on Monday morning, class on Wednesday morning, and the second sermon on Friday morning. That's my general cadence. That's what it's going to be. On weeks that I don't have one of those classes or one of those sermons, then I won't post something that particular day. So just be warned, sometimes that's going to be hit and miss. Don't worry about it. I'm probably not dead. What you see in the beginning of Exodus here, we have just finished in the scripture reading for this church, we've just finished Genesis, we've started into Exodus, we've just finished Mark, and we started into Galatians. And so that's the reading schedule we're on, finishing Galatians this week, and then delving into the first few chapters of Exodus. We'll go into Exodus in further detail in several weeks to come. What you see in the beginning of Exodus is the story of Moses. Genesis is primarily taken up by Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, ultimately, and then Joseph for the second half of the book. Chapters 37 through 50 really focus on Joseph primarily as the lead character. People say that there are three patriarchs, the fathers of the Israelite nation, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Some people also slot Joseph in as patriarch number 4. That doesn't really make sense to me. He's not the forefather of the whole Israelite nation. He's less important in that kind of meta sense, but he is very prominent when you get to the book of Genesis. The entire second half of the book is about him, basically. It's a bit of an exaggeration, but it's not that much of an exaggeration. 37 through 50 is about him. There's slightly more words about Abraham, but Joseph is second only to Abraham in Genesis. Anyway, at the end of Joseph's story, Genesis ends off in this very interesting way in the end of Genesis 50, with Joseph kind of speaking to his brothers. He's about to die, and so he says to his brothers, hey, I'm going to die, I'm not going to be here, and I am going to be buried in Egypt for the moment. But when God takes you out of the land of Egypt, which I know he will, when he takes you back to the land of Canaan, make sure you take me there as well. Genesis finishes with those ideas. Exodus begins about after a time jump of, depending on who you ask, 200 or 400 years. I'm in the 400 years camp. You can call that incorrect. I don't really care. It doesn't really matter. After these 400 years have passed, you pick back up with Israel. Israel has blossomed. There's now a massive amount of people that belong to them. They're still living in the land of Egypt for the moment, but Exodus chapter 1 records how that starts going poorly for them. There arises a Pharaoh who doesn't know Joseph. Eventually, down the historical timeline, he's not aware of Joseph, and so he starts to mistreat the Israelites. In Exodus chapter 2, you have the solution to the problem that arises. You have Moses being born, and Moses is very famous because he's born in a very unique way. He's stuck in a basket for a while as a kid, and then he grows up in Pharaoh's palace. That's pretty cool. He's Egyptian educated. We'll bring that up later in the sermon. You have all these great things that Moses is doing, and then he kills an Egyptian for mistreating one of his people, gets cast out, and ultimately becomes a shepherd. This is all in Exodus chapter 2. Exodus 3 is the story where Moses is out shepherding. It's been 40 years, by the way. Moses is now around 80, something like that. He spent around 40 years in Egypt. He spent around 40 years as a shepherd outside of Egypt. And now, at his 80th birthday, or thereabouts, God finally comes in. God lights up a special bush, and God proceeds to talk to Moses from what we call the burning bush. That is Exodus chapter 3. And as God begins to have this conversation with Moses, as Moses has begun Exodus, Moses is the special child of promise, and here we're actually starting into the sermon notes. Moses begins Exodus as a special kind of child of promise. He's the one who's going to deliver Israel and save them from all these terrible things that are happening to them. He's fit to take on the leadership of Israel, or at least God thinks he is, and so God's going to make him fit for that role, but Moses himself has to be convinced. Moses, as you're going to see in Exodus 3 and 4, has a bit of a confidence problem, or maybe he's just a bit lazy. I don't know. He won't step up. to be the leader that Israel needs him to be. And so God comes in and fixes that issue. Instead of showing faith, Moses tries to make a bunch of excuses towards God, and they end up being very similar to the ones that we make when we don't want to be faithful to God either. So, for that reason, we're going to cover Exodus 3, starting in, it's about verse 10, I think it is. Exodus 3 and verse 10, and we'll read all the way down through Exodus 4 in verse 17. I should probably actually write that on my notes so that I know what verses I should be reading on Sunday. Now, with that finally written down, and with my drink ultimately taken, let's go ahead and read Exodus chapter 3, starting in verse 10. And I want you to look for the excuses that Moses tries to make in this section. We'll read all the way down through 4:17. There are 5 excuses of note. See if you can pick all of them up as we go through. Exodus 3, starting in verse 10. I'm reading New American Standard, 2020 update. And now come, and I will send you to Pharaoh, this is God speaking, so that you may bring my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, and that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt? And God said, assuredly I will be with you, and this shall be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. Then Moses said to God, behold, I am going to the sons of Israel, and I will say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. Now they may say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, this is what you shall say to the sons of Israel. I am has sent me to you. God furthermore said to Moses, this is what you shall say to the sons of Israel. The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is the name for all generations to use to call upon me. Go and gather the elders of Israel together, and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has appeared to me, saying, I am indeed concerned about you and what has been done to you in Egypt. So I said, I will bring you up out of the oppression of Egypt, to the land of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, to the land flowing with milk and honey. Then you will pay attention to what you say, and you with the elders of Israel will come to the king of Egypt, and you will say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. So now please let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness, so that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know the king of Egypt will not permit you to go except under compulsion. So I will reach out with my hand and strike Egypt with all my miracles, which I shall do in the midst of it. And after that he will let you go. I will grant this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. It shall be that when you go, you will not go empty-handed, but every woman shall ask her neighbor and the woman who lives in her house for the articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing, and you will put them on your sons and daughters, so you will plunder the Egyptians. Then Moses said, what if they will not believe me or listen to what I have to say? For they may say, the Lord has not appeared to you. The Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? And he said, a staff. And he said, throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground, and it turned into a serpent, and Moses fled from it. But the Lord said to Moses, reach out with your hand and grasp it by its tail. So he reached out with his hand and caught it, and it turned into a staff in his hand. So that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. The Lord furthermore said to him, now put your hand inside the fold of your robe. So he put his hand inside the fold, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous like snow. And he said, put your hand inside the fold of your robe again. So he put his hand into the fold again, and when he took it out of the fold, behold, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. So if they will not believe you, nor pay attention to the evidence of the first sign, they may believe the evidence of the last sign. But if they will not believe even these 2 signs now, nor pay attention to what you say, then you shall take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground, and the water which you will take from the Nile will turn into blood on the dry ground. Then Moses said to the Lord, please, Lord, I have never been eloquent, nor neither recently nor in time past, nor since you have spoken to your servant, for I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. But the Lord said to him, who's made the human mouth? Who's made anyone unable to speak, or deaf, or able to see, or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now then go, and I myself will be with your mouth, and instruct you in what you are to say. But he said, please, Lord, now send the message by whomever you will. Then the anger of the Lord burned against Moses. And he said, "Is there not your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he speaks fluently. And moreover, behold, he is coming out to meet you. When he sees you, he will be overjoyed. So you are to speak to him and put the words in his mouth. And I myself will be with your mouth and with his mouth. And I will instruct you in what you are to do. He shall speak for you to all the people. And he will be as a mouth for you. And you will be as God to him. And you shall take in your hand the staff which you shall use, with which you shall perform the signs." Over and over and over again, I don't know if you can tell, Moses keeps on trying to shirk his responsibility and avoid doing the work that God wants for him to do. Moses does not want to join in with the effort that God has planned out for him. Again, I don't know if this is a confidence problem or if this is just lazy. I should probably write that down to make a note of. It may be that Moses is perfectly competent and he knows it and he just doesn't want to do. He just doesn't want to engage in any of these behaviors. I don't really know what his motivation is here. But ultimately, even God, right? God, who has the legendary patience of a saint, and even more than that, right? He inspires the patience of the saints. Even God gets angry at Moses and says, "Quit. This is so stupid. Like, you know what you're doing. You know what you're trying to get out of, and you know you should just be obedient instead." And he doesn't let Moses get out of it. Some people would just let Moses go. Oh, he complains enough. Fine. I guess we don't want him after all. But God doesn't, because God knows what Moses can do, and he knows that Moses is the best servant he's going to get. It's just that Moses doesn't want to do it. And so he makes excuse after excuse, and God shoots all of those down. I don't know if you caught all 5 of them, but they start something like this. Moses asks the question, "Who am I?" in chapter 3, verse 11, I believe it is. He asks the question, "Who are you?" in chapter 3, verse 13. He asks the question, "What if they don't listen?" in chapter 4, verse 1. He asks the question, "How am I supposed to be the one who speaks?" in chapter 4 and verse 10. And he asks the question, or rather makes the statement, just send whoever you want to, in chapter 4 and verse 13. All of those, even though from a certain point of view, I guess you could argue these are legitimate questions, these are really stupid. And God just gives him the answer. He's willing to give him the benefit of the doubt for the first question, and then after that, Moses knows exactly who he's dealing with. Moses knows that he doesn't really need these things. Moses just keeps trying to invent issues. He is a living problem seeking an answer instead of trying to actually answer the problems himself. Let's get started into this. Maybe you'll see what I mean as we go through. Chapter 3, verse 10, God says, "You need to go deliver my people from Egypt. Let my people go," as the statement says. That's what you're going to do, Moses. That's your primary role. And Moses says, well, who am I to do something like that? See, God wants Moses to go to Pharaoh, but Moses is... Apparently, you could pretend that this is being too humble. Who am I to go before Pharaoh? Little old me, right? Who am I to pretend that I am so important and to go to Pharaoh? Pharaoh's not going to listen to me. I'm not that important. I'm not that impressive. I'm not very cool. I'm not very noteworthy, right? Who am I to go before Pharaoh? God, you want somebody who is important. Now, do you know how stupid this is? I mean, Moses was Pharaoh's adopted grandson, right? At this point, his adopted grandfather has probably died, and it's passed on to the next Pharaoh, I assume, which would be, his uncle, right? His adopted uncle. This is a family member. This is a guy who knows him. This is a man who is familiar with him. His crimes are 40 years in the past. Maybe there's still accountability for that, but probably not. He knows the people in the palace. Moses knows Pharaoh. He grew up with this Pharaoh, whether this is his adopted grandfather, right? Moses being adopted by Pharaoh's daughter being obviously the daughter of Pharaoh, whether it's that Pharaoh A, let's call him, I don't know the names, it's Pharaoh A, or whether it's Pharaoh B, which would be the son of Pharaoh A, the brother of Pharaoh's daughter who adopted Moses. Either way, Moses grew up with these people. He is not, right, he's not unknown to them. He's not unimpressive. He grew up in Egypt. He grew up with an Egyptian education. He knows Egypt and he knows the king because he grew up in the same house with him. What does he mean? Who am I to go before Pharaoh? Yeah, your family, right? Your family. He knows who you are. Quit trying to pretend otherwise, right? God doesn't even address that. God doesn't even give that the time of day, trying to convince Moses that he is actually adequate. Moses brings up, I'm not adequate for this position. He brings up his inadequacy. He's not able to fulfill the role of this position. Yeah, he is. But God doesn't even dwell on that. That's not even an issue that's raised. I don't think I'll even put that in the basic sermon, because God just doesn't see any value in that. He passes right on over it, and he just says, look, you are inadequate. Okay, cool. Who cares? Right? What's the important part? Is the important part the messenger that I'm sending this by? Is the important part how this is conveyed, or is the important part what is conveyed? Now, there is a place to do both of those. There is a place for you to be not just have a good message, but have a good way to speak the message, or have a good way to impart the message. It's true. It's very helpful to have someone who is competent and skilled in using words. Wish I was that way, right? It's good to have that kind of competency as well. It's good to speak the truth in a way that people are more easily able to understand it. But the important part is not really how you speak the message. The important part is the message that you speak. If you don't speak the right message, you're going to mess it up, right? If you don't speak the right message, you don't have anything of value at the core. And it doesn't matter how well you speak the wrong message, it's not actually going to help anyone. And so God says, look, who cares? Right? Who am I that I should go before Pharaoh? I'll be with you. Doesn't matter. Nobody cares about you, Moses. You're not that important. You're not that special. And you know it. That's fine. Your inadequacy is good, because it helps you remember who God is. If you thought that you were going to do this all by yourself, then you would get prideful about it. Arguably, this is a mark of pride anyway, but we'll get there in a second. If you were thinking that you were doing all of this by yourself, you'd be prideful about it. I'm glad that you recognize you can't do anything. Let me do it for you. And so God is very specific here. Inadequacy comes when we forget that God is with us. If God is for us, who can be against us, right? You're not going to stop the power of God. Your enemies are not going to stop the power of God. When God is on your side, who can fight back against you? Moses' complaint is that he's not good enough. And so God says, sure, right? I'm not sure the validity of that statement, but okay, yeah, we'll go with that. Who cares? Even if that's true, it doesn't actually matter. You don't solve anything in your life by being good enough. How many things do you ultimately solve by being competent enough, or being good enough, or being able to do everything yourself? If God creates the very air you breathe, and God maintains the atmosphere to keep the air that you breathe, you can't do anything by yourself. Even if you were to argue that you could do things for yourself, you can't ultimately solve any of your problems. You can't fix anything in life. And even if you could, you definitely can't fix anything in death or in the afterlife. It's good for you to take a step back and say, I'm not worth anything. Good. That means God can make you worth something, right? That's the foundation for all of this. Humility of that kind is going to be very, very important. Of course, when you think about it, Moses is not actually being humble here. He's not actually saying he's worthless. Moses is really being prideful in its own unique way. Humility is this idea of esteeming other people and putting others before yourself, which means you try and serve them, right? You're looking for opportunities to serve and give to other people because they deserve it and you don't, right? That's the idea of humility, is seeing other people as so great. Pride is the one where you see other people as less important, and so you are inclined to make them serve you instead of you serving them. What is Moses doing here? He's not serving God. He doesn't see the importance of God. He doesn't put God above himself. He says, God, that's uncomfortable for me. I don't want to do it. Right? Instead of going out of his way to serve, he's going out of his way to not serve. That is prideful. That's him trying to get out of the work he's supposed to do. He wants God to leave him alone. Moses isn't interested in actually serving God. And so I would argue this isn't humility from Moses' perspective. He'll learn humility, but it's going to take a while. This isn't real humility. This is Moses pretending to care about God, but not actually doing so, not actually listening to God. And God is going to correct that really quick. God does not need people to serve him who don't want to serve him. God does not need people to serve him who are not going to do a good job of it. God doesn't need people to serve him who are so prideful and focused on themselves. God doesn't need self-centered people who are trying to pretend they care about him. No, God needs people who are going to be righteous. God needs people who are going to serve him and give up the things that they want to actually give something to God. That's the important thing. Quit being prideful. Serve the Lord. Moses, you know how to do this. Quit doing it. Quit standing up for yourself so much. Give it up and go towards God. Stop your false humility and get real humble real quick. That's the point. That's one of the things that God will do through the plague section is over and over again, Moses is going to run into problems and he's going to have to come back and appeal to God. The last chapter in our scripture reading this week is in Exodus chapters 5 and 6. Which are Moses runs into trouble. He declares, "Let my people go," to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh ends up, doubling the workload or increasing the workload of the Israelites. And so Moses complains to God and says, "Look, all I've done is cause people problems." And God says, "Yeah, okay, but I'm here, so it's fine." Right? God's purpose in the plagues is not merely to humble Egypt. God's purpose in the plagues is to start humbling Moses as well. And by the time you get to, Numbers and Deuteronomy, Moses is the most humble man who ever lived. Because he learns a lesson from this. That God can do whatever he wants to. And Moses decides, he learns to actually submit himself and obey. Who am I? Who cares who you are, Moses? Too many times we ask the same question. Who am I to spread the gospel message? Nobody cares who you are. Right? Nobody cares. You have God on your side? Go spread the gospel. That's the important part. Okay. After beating that horse into the ground enough, now we move on to point number 2. Who are you? Verse 13, Moses says, okay, fine. Say I go to Israel, right? And I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. What's your name? How do I communicate that to people? How do they know that you're with me? Because they're obviously not going to think very much of me. So how do I actually tell them who's with me and who's inspiring me, etc., etc.? Moses, let's look at this in the most charitable light possible. Moses may not know what God is talking to him. It may be that he thinks God isn't up to the task, but it may be that he's just, he's hearing a voice from a bush, and this hasn't been communicated to him yet, and so, let's go with it. Of course, you could always go back to verse 6, where God says, I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He was afraid to look at God, etc., etc., and that excuse probably falls apart, but let's be charitable about it. Who exactly are you? Moses is trying to downplay God's importance, or Moses is trying to establish God's importance. I'm trying to be nice here. It's not really working because it seems like this is more malicious than it is actually inquisitive. Who are you? What is your importance? Who exactly are you? How do I identify you? Well, what's the answer to that? God gives a twofold answer. Number one, he says, I am who I am. God is. It's a very famous statement. God is, he just is. If we were to try to explain that in English, we might say God is eternal, right? God is what? God is eternal. The statement is just God is, right? I am. That's what it is. When Jesus says later on in the New Testament, before Abraham was, I am, that's an implicit claim to divinity because of the I am statement back here in Exodus. God just is, right? That's his statement. He is. There's no other way to say that. He always has been, he always will be, and he always currently is. That's just a state of the universe. This is a claim to be the creator God. This is a claim to be the one in the beginning. This is the claim to be the one who originated everything in the world. Who is more worthy of praise and honor? than the God who is. But it's more than that, because it's not just that God is eternal, that is true, but it is that God is their God. You notice again here, he identifies himself in verse 15 based on his prior relationship with the Israelite people. The Lord, which would be Yahweh, the pronunciation, the full statement of his name in verse 15. The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. Right? That's who this is. There's a familial connection. This is not a random Canaanite god who's speaking from the sky and saying, "Yo, you should do something for me." No. This is the God who brought Abraham down into the land of Canaan. This is the God who worked with Isaac. Apparently, we don't have much information about that. This is the God who brought Jacob through all the problems. This is the God who renamed Jacob to Israel. This is the God who gave Israel 12 sons, which became the 12 tribes. This is the God who has brought them to the land of Egypt, and now he's about to bring them out. This is not an unfamiliar God. This is a God who has been connected to this family for generations at this point. And he's coming here. He wants to maintain his connection, and so he's coming here. I know it's been like 400 years since you were dropped off in Egypt, but I want to maintain that connection and that relationship. And he's going to do something with these people. This is a God who knows them, and they know him if they're being honest with themselves. And so he just explains himself as well, right? You have the whole rest of these verses are God just laying out the whole plan to strike Egypt and to free the Israelites. God knows what he's doing, right? This is the God who plans everything out. This is the God who knows exactly what's going to happen. You're going to go tell Pharaoh to let my people go. He's not going to listen, so I'm going to send plagues, and eventually he's going to listen, and eventually you're going to plunder the Egyptians. This is what's going to happen. God knows them. God knows what's going to happen. And so, follow the plan. He knows what he's doing, and he's going to accomplish it if you listen to him, right? Moses is kind of being taught here, stop questioning me, right? Who am I? I'm the God of your ancestors. I'm the God who brought you here. Who am I? I'm the God who you should know, and you do know if you're being real. If you're like being honest with yourself and with me, you know exactly who you are. Quit questioning, quit asking these inane, superficial questions that you know the answer to, and just listen to what I am telling you. God is all-powerful. God can do whatever he wants to. Failure is not going to be on my end, right? Failure is not going to be on God's end. It's going to be on Moses' end. Quit your fighting and go call the people. That's the message to Moses. He just needs to actually learn it. Who am I? Nobody cares. Who are you? I'm the God. You all know me. Come on. Well, fine. You are this God. Fine. It's all well and good to say that. But, God, really, honestly, seriously, what if I get to Egypt? Chapter 4, verse 1. What if I get to Egypt and say, God has appeared to me, and people don't listen? Because, anybody can say impressive words, but anybody can say these things. Very few people can actually prove it. How do I prove that you're with me? How do I prove that you know what you're doing? And in many ways, this may be Moses kind of questioning his own faith in God. How do I know that you are as powerful as you say you are? How do I know that you're the creator God that you claim to be? A question. How can I prove who you are? It's to them, sure, but it's also to him. It's interesting. God gives three signs here. And if you're going to issue a call from the divine, signs become very useful as evidence. That's why in the New Testament there are a lot of miracles that happen. Not so much nowadays, because the miracles were to establish the Word. The Word was written down in the Bible itself. We have all the same miracles that the apostles had back in the day. We have written record of them. They had visual record, and then they wrote it down. And so we have the same kind of signs today that we used to have. God has provided those miracles. He always provides miracles in support of the new covenant that's being revealed here, right? When he reveals a covenant to Abraham, he does miraculous things like the birth of Isaac. Couldn't happen physically, but with God it does. With Moses, he sends signs to Moses, he sends signs to the people, and it establishes he's behind his word. With Jesus, he sends signs behind Jesus to establish that this is his word. God's miracles are used as evidence of information, of new information that is being revealed, which is why when we're existing in this age in 2026, there isn't new information being revealed. There's no real need for miracles. That's not to say miracles could never happen. God can do whatever he wants to, but the primary facet of miracles was to provide evidence for the word being spoken, and the word has been spoken. We don't need any more of that. So that's one argument as to why miracles don't exist nowadays, or at least are not in common usage nowadays, at the very least. So there's that idea. But if you're going to issue a call from the divine, again, evidence is very useful. It's curious to me that the evidence, the signs that Moses gets, Moses asks for them in verse 1 because there's a possibility that the people of Israel will not listen to him. But in reality, the signs are used to convince Moses of God's power here in chapter 4, and they are used to convince Pharaoh of God's power in a few chapters later, starting in, I believe it's chapter 7. But they're never used to convince the Israelites of power, I don't think. Unless I totally read over that. The Israelites didn't need convincing. It was Moses who needs convincing. It's Pharaoh who needs convincing. And so as much as Moses tries to dress this up and say, well, the people might have a faith issue, realistically, it's him who has a faith issue. And so God proves himself to Moses. The staff is the first one. The staff, throw it on the ground, and it turns into a snake, and Moses runs away, and God says, ha, coward, pick it up. Right? Not in so many words, but yeah, that is what happens. The staff, this rod of guidance, becomes a serpent, and then it becomes a staff again. This is a picture of a raw power kind of being tamed by God. Serpent has, from the beginning, been duplicitous, from the beginning been a destructive entity, right? Serpents are not trustworthy. Serpents are not good. You don't want to hang out with a serpent. That's not going to end out well for you. And yet, through God, this raw, destructive power, when it's tamed by God, when Moses grabs the staff, or when he grabs the snake, it turns back into a staff. God can take the power and tame it and turn it into something useful. A shepherd's staff is a sign that leads people. A shepherd's staff helps direct sheep. That's what a shepherd uses it for. Through God, even this horrible, unchecked power becomes tamed and channeled in a healthy and beneficial direction. It's interesting that this sign ends up being given to Pharaoh, primarily, to learn from. Pharaoh and his magicians, they have a lot of raw power. The magicians even create snakes of their own with their staves. They even, they summon, they turn water to blood. They summon more frogs, etc., etc. They do all those things. There is raw power behind the throne of Egypt. The demons are very competent, which is a whole different discussion to talk about with Egypt. But God takes that power away from them, and he tames it. He turns it into something else. He turns their power into a sign for himself. Even when, by the time you get to the gnats or the flies, or the lice is the third one. By the time you get there, the magicians say, "Look, we can't do this. This is the finger of God." And so God uses the power of the magicians to actually convince them that he is more powerful than they are. So that's curious to me. You have the staff. You have the second sign, which is leprosy, which is stick your hand in your shirt. Boom, it's leprous. That's a permanent disease. That's something you can't fix. So stick it back in your shirt. Boom, it's cleaned. Incredible. God can generate leprosy. God's things can generate leprosy, but God can also cleanse the leprosy and fix the ultimate problem. Leprosy is often used in the Old Testament and New Testament to communicate the idea of sin. Leprosy is just a generic term for a skin disease, right? And so some of that can be very minor, but some of that can be incredibly major. If you've seen leprosy wounds, they can be nasty. It can rot entire limbs off and put holes in you and all sorts of stuff. Not good, right? Not a good situation to be in. But that mirrors the picture of sin. Sin gets in, sometimes just a little bit, sometimes a whole lot of it, right? It doesn't matter how much sin you have, you're still leprous, you're still diseased, you're still condemned and separated from God, however much it is. And so, leprosy is used often as a picture of who God is. If you remember in the New Testament, when Jesus goes to heal the leper, there's this leprous man who says, look, if you are willing, you can make me clean. I believe that's in Luke 5. And Jesus touches the man, which is something you don't do. It could be communicable, and even if it's not, it's just you don't want to be around someone who's unclean. But Jesus touches the man with the disease, and his power flows out of Jesus into the man. It cleanses the leprosy. It takes those things away. God can fix even the most permanent of problems. It's interesting that Paul would note in Romans, for instance, that sin came alive through God's law. In many ways, the law existing is the cause of the disease, is the cause of leprosy. God can cause the leprosy, but God can also heal the leprosy. Some people take it too far, right? You have the atheist arguments, which are, well, God had to sacrifice himself to cleanse us from something that he originally created. That's not really what I'm saying, right? You can take that too far to mean too many things where it's not logical at that point. That's not what we're talking about. But when God establishes something good, as a result, something bad happens. I guess I'm not even in the sermon, so I can go explain this to a further extent. There is, back in Genesis 1, God creates the light. Day one. God made light when there was none. When God creates the light, the text specifically says God created the light. And then what happened? God separated the light from the darkness. Okay, question. Did God create the darkness? No. No, he didn't. Well, I guess you could say he did. What, right? Because when there is light that exists, then of course there is darkness. In my background, I have a light that's here, right? And it's lighting up the things in the background, except it's not really hitting those lower shelves. And so they're sitting in shadow. You can tell that they're in shadow because the light is not there. Now, if the light was off, if I didn't know what light was, I wouldn't be able to say they're in shadow. I wouldn't be able to say they're in the darkness because I wouldn't have any frame of reference for a difference. But as soon as God introduces light, suddenly darkness is made clear because darkness is the absence of light. When God creates something good, he doesn't also create something evil, but when God creates something good, you can tell that something evil also exists. When God creates a healthy person, God does not also create a sick person, but when a person is sick, now we have a term for it. We know that that's bad. We know it's not normal, right? God creates something good, and the inverse also happens, because when you see something that's good, now you have the term, now you have the ability to quantify what good looks like as opposed to what evil looks like. It's the same thing here. When God creates light, darkness also happens. When God creates health, sickness also happens. When God creates life, death also happens. When God creates the law, sin also happens. The law is good. That's the point that Paul makes. But because the law is created, that means I know what it is to be without the law. That means I know what it is to disobey the law. As soon as somebody tells me to listen to them and I stop listening to them, I've violated the law. The law was good. It was helpful, but I have violated it. That's the problem. Sin came alive through God's law. That's an unfortunate side effect. God creating the leprosy. Well, God creates health. God creates the natural state of a human being. God creates the good and healthy body. That doesn't mean it can't be overrun by your choices or by others or just by chance. That doesn't mean that that can't change. But God doesn't create that which is so destructive. Sin came alive through God's law, but God himself saves. You can look at that overly simplifying it. You can say, God created the leprosy and God cured the leprosy here. Realistically, God just cures the leprosy. But in order to show that sign, he has to create it a little bit. Again, that's a big excursus. It's not going to make it into the real sermon, but interesting to consider how that's a sign for what God does. Third sign, if they don't listen to either of those, then you can turn the water to blood. That's a little foretaste of the 10 plagues, and we're going to get there in the first plague anyway, so that'll end up being very, very true. Does Moses end up needing any of this evidence to convince the people of Israel? Already said this. No, he doesn't. Israel accepts the words. He only uses this evidence for himself and for Pharaoh ultimately later on. God provides plenty of evidence for Pharaoh. He doesn't need these signs for Pharaoh. He has all the 10 plagues that are coming up, but he gives extra signs. He's providing for the particularly stubborn to try and make Pharaoh turn around, but Pharaoh doesn't want to. Does God override free will? No, and the evidence of the Exodus is very, very clear on that. It is true. God provides evidence, even evidence that is not necessary, and evidence that God presumably knows will not ultimately be necessary, or, will not ultimately help convince somebody. But there is evidence just in case you need it. When I think about this, there are some people today, a lot of people today, when you're talking to them, you don't need advanced apologetic learning or courses or whatever it is. You don't need advanced apologetics to be able to convince people to listen to God. A lot of times you don't. Sometimes you do, but a lot of times you don't. Most people are willing to listen to what God has to say and hear God out without having to, go the extra mile and run every single little last question. But God still provides them, just in case. God still provides plenty of reason for us to be able to explain, just in case somebody needs it. Now, how many conversations will you have where all those advanced apologetic principles come into play? How many conversations will you have where I forget the term, undesigned coincidences? Right? You can learn about undesigned coincidences. For example, undesigned coincidences are primarily at use in the Gospels, in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, where they overlap and the details that different accounts fill in actually fill in the gaps in each other's stories, and they work together. They're not designed. It's not like both accounts are repeating the same thing, but one writer says, it was around Passover time. One writer says Jesus for the feeding of the 5,000. One of the Gospels says it was around Passover time. One of the Gospels says the grass was green. One of the Gospels says Jesus had them sit down on the grass. What does that mean? Well, Passover time would be March or early April, which is right after the rainy season, which is when the grass is green and when the grass is most suitable to be sat on. Okay. If you have just one story, then it's like, oh, it's Passover time, or oh, the grass is green. Like, why is that significant? But when you put them all together, suddenly it makes sense. God is uniting those pictures, or those details, into one picture. They're all corroborating evidence around the same time of year that this is all happening, right? You can learn stuff like that. Does that matter? For most normal conversations that you have about feeding of the 5,000, do you need to be able to say that? Probably not. Do I need to be able to say that? Probably not. Most of the studies that I've had, we don't end up going there, right? We'll talk about the feeding of the 5,000 and what it means. We never ask the question, why does it say the grass was green? Because that's not the most important thing. But God has provided the evidence in case you want to go that route. In case there's someone who is just so skeptical or just so curious, he's provided extra evidence. Moses doesn't need these signs, but God provides them anyway. I don't need to know all the specific background details of advanced apologetic, whatever it is, but God has provided them anyway. But just in case somebody needs to see it. It is always true that people may not want to listen, but we are well equipped in that case. And again, nothing about this is forcing others to believe, but it is showing others what we do have, all the evidence that is there, and letting them make decisions for themselves. Well, that brings us to complaint number 4 from Moses. Who are we to speak for God? Nobody actually cares. God's with you. If God is for us, who can be against us, right? That's the God that we serve. That's the God who's with us. Hasn't God given you plenty of evidence yourself? right? For yourself and for others. Hasn't God given you plenty of that? Yes, absolutely. Fourth complaint then, chapter 4, verse 10. I don't talk good. It's a stupid complaint. But here we are. Moses is running out of steam, running out of ability to complain, actually. And so Moses, who was raised in Egypt and educated and trained in speaking in Pharaoh's own house, cannot speak, allegedly. He doesn't feel confident in that, or he just doesn't want to be assigned that. He is just arguing with God at this point. How can someone as ineloquent as I am be a fitting representation for the God of the universe? Art thou so great, or art thou so ingrate that thou reliest upon someone such as me? Someone so insignificant and unskilled in speaking. Moses is presumably quite eloquent, right? And he's making this excuse, right? I can't speak. I have never been eloquent, neither recently nor in time past, nor since you have spoken to your servant, for I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. Allegedly, right? Moses probably knows how to talk, but I digress. What is the answer? The answer, God doesn't even say, Moses, yes, you do know how to talk. Again, it's not, Moses says, I'm not important. God doesn't say, which you probably could say, God doesn't say, yeah, you are important, deal with it. God says, whatever, move on. Here we have another answer, which is, okay, whatever, move on. Talking good, eloquence is great, but it's not required to serve the Lord. Nobody actually cares. Some people are naturally gifted in it. Some people aren't naturally gifted in it. Does it actually matter? And the answer is no. Even the Apostle Paul, right? It's very odd, but in 2 Corinthians 10 and verse 10, Paul is being complained about. There's a situation in Corinth where some preachers are coming in, some very eloquent and learned preachers are coming in, and they are saying, Paul's writing is very strong and eloquent, but his physical presence is weak and contemptible. And Paul doesn't say, no, I'm very impressive as a speaker. Paul says, what does it matter? Move on. Go do something else with your time, right? Find a different complaint. Paul wasn't eloquent, it seems. Some people think that that's a lie. Some people think that the other teachers are lying about Paul and Paul just doesn't care enough to address it. That could be true. It could be that Paul was a very eloquent man. You would expect, as someone who was, so educated by the Pharisees, you would expect that Paul was a better speaker than most, but it doesn't have to be. And Paul may well not have been that great of a speaker. And he goes and spreads the gospel all over the world anyway, because, it's the truth of the message that matters. It's not the actual delivery. It doesn't matter how smoothly you deliver a message. That's not ultimately important in the grand scheme of things. Because the second answer is, the first answer is, it doesn't matter if you talk good. The second answer is, I will be with you. Right? God will be with you directly, just like the other prophets, just like in the New Testament, just like the apostles. God will be with him. And if something important needs to be said, God is going to help with it. That's the important thing, right? Is God is there. It doesn't matter that you're there, Moses. It doesn't matter that you're speaking. It doesn't matter how good you are at speaking. If God is there, everything's going to work out okay. It may be that God is, in verse 12, I myself will be with your mouth and instruct you in what you are to say. It could be a situation where God is commandeering Moses' mouth and saying, let me take over, and it's God's words directly that are being spoken. It could just be that God is helping him think and helping him intuit things. When Pharaoh protests against Moses and Moses doesn't know what to do, but then he finds an idea in his head and says, oh, that sounds like that, right? That's a good way to answer that. And then he throws that out there. That could be just God inspiring him and giving him some thoughts. I don't know exactly how the inspiration process works, but either way, God provides the answer. And God comes in and he helps Moses out. Are you bad at speaking? Right? These are all excuses that we make. I'm not that important. Nobody actually cares. Who knows who God is? Well, a lot of people know who God is. We have evidence about that. How do I show people who God is? Well, we have evidence for that, right? That's what God has provided us. Well, maybe I'm just bad at speaking. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to display the message. That doesn't really matter at the end of the day. If God is with you, if you have the truth with you, then sure, good phrasing can help, but really the truth is the important part. Good phrasing without the truth is a waste. It doesn't actually mean anything. It's like having icing without cake. There's no substance. There's nothing there's nothing core to actually like give you something worthwhile. All talk and no actual substance to the matter doesn't make it worthwhile. You can be bad at speaking and still communicate the truth, and that's better than someone who's good at speaking but communicates falsehood or just empty words. And so, Moses, having run out of excuses and questions to actually ask, decides to end up at the best place, which is verse 13, where Moses says, "Okay, I hear you. I hear you, God. Send whomever you want to." This is the moment where God gets angry. Because this is so stupid. Moses, having run out of excuses, plays his trump card. He says all the right words. He says, essentially, your will be done. Right? Send the message by whomever you will. Your will be done, God. I'm praying in accordance with what you want. And he's saying all these right things. But he's so disrespectful because God has made it very clear whom he wants to send. God has made it very clear that Moses is the one who's supposed to go. God has made it very clear that Moses is the chosen one, and Moses is going to go and do this work. And so when Moses says, your will be done, it's not a respectful kind of, well, I appreciate what God has done for me. Your will be done. I'm going to sacrifice what I want to actually fulfill it. It is your will be done, and your will be different than what it is because I don't want to be involved. Moses avoids God's will, trying to praise God and pass responsibility elsewhere all at the same time. What is the answer? This is where God gets angry in verse 14. And he says there's a twofold answer here. Number one is it will be done and you're going to do it. God is mad, but Moses will not escape. Moses is being stubborn. Moses is trying to get out of it. And where most of us would say, you know what, it's not worth the trouble, God says, no, you're being stupid and you're going to follow. Right? I have commanded, you will obey. That is how this is going to work. You can be nice about it. You can be pleasant about it. You can make this easy, or I will work on you. I will drag you kicking and screaming, and I will make you deliver my law even though you don't want to, right? I will make you do this. You can do this in a way that leads to your salvation, or you can do this in a way that leads to your condemnation, but you're going to do it. I've picked you for this. You cannot get out of it. It will be done and you will do it. And that's his first answer. And then his second answer is surprisingly nice, which is, fine, I will also send help to help you out. Aaron is commissioned. Aaron is Moses' older brother, commissioned to be a part of the work. God could have just sent Moses alone, and by rights, he probably should have just sent Moses alone. But Moses requested that somebody else do the talking. And so God says, fine, I'll send somebody else to help you do the talking. Now, ultimately, Moses, right, in verse 15, Moses is to speak to Aaron and put the words in his mouth. God will be with Moses' mouth and with Aaron's mouth, but Moses will be the first deliverer of the message. Aaron will be the one who gives the message to Pharaoh, at least at first. But Moses is still the one who's speaking, right? Moses, this is still your responsibility. What you'll see as you go throughout the Exodus story, a friend of mine pointed this out to me the other weekend. I need to make a sermon on it sometime. He said he made a sermon on it, and it sounded very intriguing. As you go through the rest of the plagues, what happens is Aaron starts out talking to Pharaoh, and then you see some of Moses and Aaron talking to Pharaoh, and by the time you get to the end of the plagues, it's Moses talking to Pharaoh. And Moses has stepped up in his ability. And it's no longer Moses communicating to Aaron for Aaron to communicate it to somebody else. It's Moses communicating it to the other people because God has helped him to step up and actually take on the responsibility himself. Moses doesn't need anyone other than God, but he thinks he does. And so God helps him by giving him someone else for a little bit until Moses realizes that he doesn't need anyone other than God. God is nice to provide someone else to go alongside him to help alleviate some of that burden, but God will ultimately send his messenger. And as much as we might not want to do it ourselves, God will ultimately make us do it ourselves. That's our job. That's our role. That's our responsibility, is to go in and do the work of God because God has commanded us to do it. You can make all the excuses you want to. It's not going to fly with God, and if you're honest with yourself, it's not going to fly with you either. Don't try and make excuses. Just obey. It's easier for everybody if you just obey. And so the ineloquent among us are here speaking into a camera and recording some things. I know this isn't smooth, right? I know this isn't ideal. A lot of people could do this kind of thing a lot better than I can, but I've still got a responsibility. And you've still got a responsibility. So stop holding back on, you're not good enough. Yeah, nobody said you were good enough. Stop holding back on, I don't know who God is. Yes, you do. You understand him. Stop holding back on, I don't have enough evidence for God. Yeah, you absolutely do. Quit saying, I don't know how to talk or whatever else it is. God, just do whatever you want to. He's trying. He's working on you. He's trying to fix you and do what he wants to. His will is that you are his servant. His will is that you will listen and pay attention to him. And you can make that easy or you can make that difficult. You can, follow him and end up in heaven, or you can reject that and end up in hell. That's up to you. That's your own choice. Don't make these excuses. They are stupid and dumb. God does not think highly of them, and you shouldn't either if you are an intelligent human being. So, was that rude? Yeah, but God said it to Moses first, so I feel justified in passing along the message. God has made plenty of accommodations for you, so actually work with him. God wants to work with his people, but they have to work with him first. And so don't be like Moses, stubborn like this. Be like the Moses who actually steps up and does what he's supposed to do. That's the lesson for Sunday morning, Exodus chapters 3 and 4. Hopefully that's something good to think about. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you benefited. And there's something of value in there for you to consider. And I will see you next time. I will see you on Wednesday for class time in Daniel chapter 7.